Final Fantasy XVI is going to be an action-heavy game in the way that the FF series has never seen before. By having Ryota Suzuki join as battle planner, best known for his work on Devil May Cry 5 and Dragon's Dogma, the game is doubling down on aggressive action gameplay that will likely please action game enthusiasts and make turn-based enthusiasts mauled at the very idea of it. However, this wasn't producer Naoki Yoshida and director Hiroshi Takai's first attempt at wanting to make an action RPG. In fact, at one point, they were working on a new IP that was quite similar to Bloodborne. That's right, today's development lore is very fascinating, which is why if you love Final Fantasy development lore, you should hit the subscribe button, as we'll have much to discuss in the coming weeks as Final Fantasy XVI is on the horizon. A published collection of Naoki Yoshida's Famitsu bi-weekly column as translated by user Shinitan and brought to my attention by user Dreamboem, we found out about this Bloodborne-esque IP that Yoshi P and Director Takai were working on, and coincidentally, before Bloodborne ever even launched. This idea came about as Yoshi P was attempting to make a game that targeted the Western market, deciding to create a hardcore action game. It's worth noting again that Final Fantasy XVI seems to be taking a lot of influence from Devil May Cry 5, even having its battle planner, an idea that it seems is still going to be relevant beyond this cancelled project. On targeting the Western audience, Naoki Yoshida said he and the team felt they couldn't make an authentically feeling Western game, being a people who didn't grow up in the West. As a result, they even hired people such as artists from the West to work on the project. During the interview, they were asked, quote, "What genre was this game going to be?" Takai: "It was similar to Bloodborne." Yoshida: "Yes, that's the closest example. So it was an action game." Yoshida: "Yes, not an RPG, but a fairly hardcore action game." Minagawa: "If we kept going and Bloodborne was released first, we would probably be freaking out right now." Takai: "It had the same weapons and guns, and it was in a gothic style." Yoshida: "We also had a few sci-fi elements in there. When I first saw Bloodborne, I thought, where have I seen this before?" He laughed. Takai: "Thinking about it now, I don't think our personal interests are very Final Fantasy." Not only that, but the game was going to have its own PvP mode, which sounds incredibly interesting. Famitsu asked, quote, "When did you start discussing the game's direction?" Minagawa: "We discussed it when I was still working on Tactics Ogre Wheel of Fate. We already had a good idea of the game's ambience and lore by then." Yoshida: "It was going to have 5-player multiplayer, where 4 of the players are on the protagonist side. The remaining player takes the player killer role. The PKer has to fight the other players 1-on-4, but they have the strongest abilities out of all the characters to make up for it. However, if the PKer died in the game, their character would be deleted and they'd have to start anew. It was a vicious system." While it sounds cool, Yoshida doesn't think the game would have been a very huge success. Yoshida: "It was basically Bloodborne plus that system. If we'd kept going, I think we'd be still working on it right now." Minagawa: "I really wonder how it would have turned out." Yoshida: "I think it would have been a huge failure. At the time, I was the director and Takai-san was kind of like the manager, but I couldn't help but want to put the work in the hands of the young workers. Kind of like a parent wanting their kids to learn and grow. I didn't know how much longer we'd be working, and I felt compelled to train candidates for the next director. And I got into heated arguments with Takai-san because I was entrusting them too much. I think Yoshida's philosophy about training the younger staff is the right approach, as it is better for the long-term stability of a team and a company, even if it means it takes a little bit longer for work to get done." However, the project didn't end up getting too far in development before it would end up being scrapped. Takai: "After 6 to 8 months of development, the game was gradually taking shape, but at the same time, the staff were working longer and longer on trial and error. At first, I thought it was fine to just wait and see, but I got impatient watching them, and they were taking too long to come up with solutions. Eventually, this project would be scrapped as Yoshida, Takai, and Minagawa were all enlisted in fixing Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, an endeavor that ultimately led to remaking the entire game as Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. But one can't help but wonder how this game would have turned out if it stuck to its original vision. And you might be wondering, what do you mean stuck to its original vision? That implies that a game was released. And unfortunately, a game was released. A lesser known Square Enix mobile title known as Blood Mask reused many of the concepts and tried to rework them into said mobile title. Yoshida and Takai are still thanked on the credits as the proprietors of the original concept, but I don't know if you'd want credit for this. The game had some interesting ideas, such as allowing allowing you to insert yourself into it by face scanning, but it was ultimately a failure both critically and financially, with critics absolutely banning the game and a lack of interest leading to it being shut down a year after release. It was unfortunate to see what could have been Square's own take on a Souls-like, other than, well, you know. One also can't help but wonder if that taste in games isn't affecting Final Fantasy XVI's design philosophy. Clearly, Final Fantasy XVI is not going to be a Soulsborne game, although after playing Elden Ring, I kind of wouldn't mind if it was. Though I do think it's important to note Yoshida and Takai's taste in games, and how it could impact the finalized product that we receive. While unfortunately we'll never know how this game would have actually turned out, and I don't mean whatever miserable this is. With Yoshida and Takai working on games together for the future, it's exciting to see them work on Final Fantasy XVI and whatever else comes after that. Shout out to patron Haiti and the rest of the Ultima community.